Sarah sat in the darkness of their bedroom, her laptop glowing with damning evidence. On the screen, her husband orchestrating a murder. Voice recordings of his orders. Video of him manipulating a drug addict into killing his own sister. She had two choices: destroy the man she loved, or become his accomplice. She chose option 3, something no one saw coming. But to understand that choice, you need to know what happened the morning after a man died and a woman went to prison for a crime her husband engineered. Sarah walked through the front door of their penthouse apartment like a ghost. Her legs moved automatically, one foot in front of the other, but she felt disconnected from her body, as if she were watching herself from somewhere far away. The apartment was dark except for the glow of the television in the living room where Mi-sun sat on the couch, his silhouette motionless against the flickering light. He turned when he heard her enter, his face partially illuminated by the TV screen.
Sarah.
You're home. I was worried. Where were you? She didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Her throat felt closed, her mouth dry. Instead, she walked past him without a word, heading straight for the bathroom. She heard him call her name again, heard the concern in his voice, heard him start to stand up, but she kept walking. The bathroom door closed behind her with a soft click. Sarah locked it, and only then, finally alone, did she allow herself to fall apart. She sank to the floor, her back against the bathtub, and pressed a towel to her face to muffle the sounds as the sobs tore through her body. Everything she had witnessed tonight came flooding back in vivid, horrible detail. Min-ho's desperate face as he signed that contract. The sound of the gunshot. The sickening crack when Yuna broke her brother's neck with a perfectly executed karate move. The body bag being wheeled out of the Peninsula Hotel. Yuna's blank, shocked face as she was led away in handcuffs. And through it all, Mi-sun's cold, calculated planning. Every step orchestrated. Every outcome and...
Dear listeners, my name is Stephen. I am the author of this wonderful story. Beyond this, I'm proud to be recognized as a top author on Pocket FM, an audio-to-read platform where I've written countless stories, fictions. Yeah, you can explore more of my book in the description below. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to my channel and share your thoughts in the comment section. I really appreciate for listening to my story. Thank you for choosing my channel.
If you're new to this series, it already has parts 1-6. Feel free to check my channel to watch them. Anticipated. A man was dead, and her husband had made it happen without ever touching him, without ever being anywhere near the scene. Sarah cried until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen. She cried for Min-ho, a broken addict who had been weaponized against his own sister. She cried for Yuna, who would spend years in prison for defending herself against a threat Mi-sun had created. She cried for herself, for the innocence she had lost, for the simple love she had thought she had. But as the tears finally began to slow, as her breathing steadied and the fog of emotions started to clear, Sarah found herself thinking about something else. Something that cut through the horror and grief and landed with startling clarity in her mind. Mi-sun had done all of this to protect her. To protect their marriage. He could have given Yuna what she wanted. Could have agreed to be her mistress's lover. Could have handed over shares of the company. Could have let her back into his life. It would have been easier, simpler, less dangerous. But he hadn't. He had chosen Sarah instead. Had chosen their marriage, their future, their life together. And in doing so, he had revealed exactly who he was. Not the polished CEO. Not the reformed businessman. But the man beneath, the strategist, the fighter, the former mafia boss who would do absolutely anything to protect what was his. Sarah wiped her eyes with a towel and stood up, looking at herself in the mirror. Her face was blotchy and red, her eyes bloodshot, her hair a mess. She looked like she'd been through hell.
Which, in a way, she had.
But as she stared at her reflection, another thought crystallized. Who was she to judge Mi-sun? What right did she have to be horrified by what he'd done when her own past was far from clean? Sarah had been a hacker in Chicago. Not a white-hat security tester or an ethical whistleblower. She had been a criminal. She had hacked bank accounts and stolen money. She had sold corporate secrets to the highest bidder. She had helped organized crime figures locate people who didn't want to be found, people who later disappeared. She had blood on her hands too, even if she'd never pulled a trigger or broken someone's neck. She and Mi-sun were the same. Two people from dark pasts who had tried to leave that darkness behind. Two criminals who had reinvented themselves as respectable members of society. They had both believed they could escape who they used to be. But maybe you never really escaped. Maybe that person was always there, dormant, waiting for a reason to resurface. Mi-sun had found his reason in Yuna's threats. And if Sarah was being completely honest with herself, if someone had threatened Mi-sun the way Yuna had threatened their marriage, wouldn't Sarah have done the same? Wouldn't she have used every skill, every connection, every ruthless instinct she possessed to eliminate that threat? The answer was yes. She knew it with absolute certainty. She would have done exactly what Mi-sun had done. Sarah turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on her face, washing away the traces of tears. She brushed her hair, straightened her clothes, took several deep breaths until her hands stopped shaking. When she finally looked presentable, she unlocked the bathroom door and stepped out. Mi-sun was still in the living room, but he had moved to stand by the window, staring out at the Seoul skyline. The TV was still on, and Sarah's attention was drawn to it immediately. Breaking news footage showed the Peninsula Hotel, police cars with flashing lights, crime scene tape cordoning off the entrance. A reporter's voice narrated over the images. Prominent businesswoman Choi Yuna has been arrested in connection with the death of her brother, Choi Min-ho. According to police sources, Min-ho arrived at his sister's hotel suite late last night in what appears to have been a drug transaction gone wrong. When the deal turned violent, Yuna killed her brother in what she claims was self-defense. Sarah walked closer to the TV, watching as the footage shifted to show Yuna being let out in handcuffs, her expensive silk robe torn and stained, her face completely blank. The reporter continued, however, drugs were found on both siblings, along with evidence suggesting Min-ho had been dealing for years. Yuna is being charged with manslaughter and conspiracy to traffic narcotics. Her bail has been denied due to flight risk concerns. The case has shocked Seoul's business community, as Choi Yuna was considered one of the city's most successful entrepreneurs. More footage showed Min-ho's covered body being wheeled out on a stretcher, showed detectives examining the hotel suite, showed the gun lying on the floor tagged as evidence. The evidence against Yuna appears overwhelming, the reporter said. Witnesses report hearing a violent argument, multiple gunshots, and sounds of a struggle. A signed contract found in Min-ho's possession suggests he was being paid for some kind of security work, though details remain unclear. What is clear is that Choi Yuna will likely spend a significant amount of time in prison for this tragic incident. Sarah felt Mi-sun's presence beside her before she heard him. He had moved from the window and now stood just behind her left shoulder, both of them watching the news coverage in silence. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I know you must have questions. About what happened tonight. About Yuna. I want to explain." "I don't need an explanation," Sarah interrupted, her voice steady. She turned to look at him, meeting his eyes directly. "I know exactly what happened." Mi-sun's face went carefully blank, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the wariness in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean I know what you did. How you did it. Why you did it." She gestured at the TV. "This didn't just happen. You made it happen." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever, though it was probably only a few seconds. Mi-sun's expression cycled through several emotions, shock, fear, resignation, before finally settling on a kind of tired defeat. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Since last night. I followed you, listened to your conversations, watched everything unfold." Sarah kept her voice level, factual. "I know about the drugs in Busan, the contract,
Min-ho, ghost.
all of it." Mi-sun closed his eyes as if in pain. When he opened them again, they were filled with something that looked like grief. Sarah, we should go to bed, she said, cutting him off again. Tomorrow is a work day. We both need rest. She walked toward the bedroom without waiting for his response. Behind her, she heard Mi-sun's sharp intake of breath, heard the confusion in his voice when he called after her. That's it? You're just going to bed? You're not. You don't want to talk about this? Sarah paused in the bedroom doorway and looked back at him. There's nothing to talk about tonight. We're both exhausted. Tomorrow, we'll deal with everything. Tonight, I just want to sleep. It was a lie, of course. She knew she wouldn't sleep. Knew he wouldn't either. But she needed time. Time to fully process what she decided. Time to prepare for the conversation they would need to have. Time to be absolutely certain of the choice she was making. Because it was a choice. A conscious, deliberate choice to stay with a man who had orchestrated murder. A choice to become his partner not just in marriage, but in darkness. A choice to accept the monster and everything that came with him. Sarah changed into pajamas mechanically, brushed her teeth, went through all the normal nighttime routines as if this were any other evening. Mi-sun came into the bedroom eventually, moving quietly, giving her space. He changed clothes in the bathroom, and when he came out, he looked older somehow, worn down by the weight of secrets revealed. They climbed into bed on opposite sides, the space between them feeling like a chasm. Sarah lay on her side, facing away from him, listening to his breathing in the darkness. She knew he wasn't sleeping, knew he was probably lying there terrified, waiting for her to leave, to call the police, to do something that would destroy the life they had built. But she did none of those things. She just lay there, thinking, feeling the weight of her decisions settling into her bones. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, she would show him exactly what she knew and what she had chosen to do about it. For now, they lay in the darkness, two people with blood on their hands, bound together by secrets that would either destroy them or make them unbreakable. Morning came too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Sarah had dozed fitfully, her sleep broken by fragmented dreams of body bags and handcuffs and Mi-sun's cold voice giving orders. When the alarm went off at 6 a.m., she was almost relieved to have an excuse to stop pretending to sleep. Mi-sun was already awake beside her. She could tell by the tension in his body, the way he reached over to turn off the alarm too quickly, too precisely. No one who had been sleeping would move that deliberately. They went through their morning routine in near silence. Sarah showered first, then Mi-sun. They dressed in their professional clothes, Sarah in a tailored black pantsuit, Mi-sun in a charcoal gray suit that made him look every inch the powerful CEO. They moved around each other like dancers who knew the choreography too well, each giving the other space, neither willing to break the fragile peace. Breakfast was the hardest part. They sat across from each other at the kitchen island, coffee and toast between them, and Sarah's superscript one could feel Mi-sun's eyes on her face, watching, waiting, trying to read her thoughts. She kept her expression neutral, ate mechanically, responded to his attempts at small talk with monosyllables. Sarah, he finally said, setting down his coffee cup with enough force that it clinked against the counter. I can't do this. I can't sit here pretending everything is normal when I know you know. When I know you're probably planning to leave me, or turn me in, or... I'm not leaving you, Sarah said calmly, taking another sip of her coffee. And I'm not turning you in. The relief that washed over Mi-sun's face was so profound that Sarah almost felt guilty for making him wait this long. Almost. Then what are you going to do? His voice was barely above a whisper. We'll talk about it at the office. Not here. Sarah stood up, gathering her dishes. We should leave soon if we want to beat traffic. The drive to Kang Corporation was surreal. They sat side by side in Mi-sun's car, classical music playing softly from the speakers, Seoul's morning rush hour traffic crawling around them. To anyone watching, they looked like any other successful couple heading to work. No one could see the tension thrumming between them, the weight of unspoken words filling the car like smoke. Sarah used the time to mentally review everything she had prepared last night before finally falling into her fitful sleep. She had organized all her evidence onto a single USB drive. Every video, every audio recording, every piece of damning proof she had collected. She had practiced what she would say, how she would say it, the exact tone she needed to strike. This conversation would define their marriage, would define who they were as individuals and as a couple. She couldn't afford to get it wrong. When they arrived at Kang Corporation, they separated as usual. Mi-sun to the executive floor, Sarah to her office 3 floors below. But instead of starting her regular work, Sarah sat at her desk and stared at the USB drive in her hand. The small piece of plastic and metal held enough information to destroy Mi-sun completely. To send him to prison for decades. To dismantle Kang Corporation. To ruin his grandmother's image of her beloved grandson.
Power.
That's what this USB drive represented. Total, absolute power over her husband's life. The question was, what was she going to do with it? Sarah opened her desk drawer and pulled out a burner laptop she had purchased months ago during the G1 situation, a device with no connection to Kang Corporation's network, no ties to her identity, completely clean. She plugged in the USB drive and spent the next 2 hours meticulously going through every file, every recording, every piece of evidence. She watched the footage of Mi-sun in Busan again, saw him deliberately contaminating the drugs with his fingerprints to frame Minho. She listened to his conversations with Ghost, heard the cold calculation in his voice as he planned out every contingency. She read through the messages on the burner phone, saw the web of manipulation he had woven. And through it all, Sarah felt a strange kind of admiration growing in her chest. Mi-sun had played this perfectly. Every move had been calculated to give him plausible deniability while ensuring the outcome he wanted. He had turned Yuna's own brother into a weapon against her without ever being directly connected to the violence. It was brilliant in its cruelty, masterful in its execution. The man she had married was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. And somehow, that didn't frighten her the way it should have. At 11 o'clock, Sarah closed the laptop, tucked it under her arm along with the USB drive, and took the elevator up to the executive floor. Mi-sun's assistant looked up when Sarah approached. "Mrs. Kang, does Mr. Kang know you're coming? He's in the middle of." "He'll want to see me," Sarah said firmly. "It's important. And private." The assistant hesitated, then buzzed Mi-sun's office. After a brief exchange, she nodded. "You can go in." Sarah took a deep breath and pushed open the door to Mi-sun's office. He was standing by the window, his back to the door, hands in his pockets. He turned when he heard her enter, and the vulnerability in his expression, the fear, the hope, the desperate need to know what she was thinking, made him look younger somehow, more human. "Close the door," Sarah said quietly. "And lock it." Mi-sun did as she asked, then stood there, waiting. Sarah walked to his desk, set down the laptop, and plugged in the USB drive. She opened the first file, the video footage from Busan, and stepped back. "Come here," she said. "I want you to see this." Mi-sun approached slowly, like a man walking toward his execution. He looked at the screen, and Sarah watched his face drain of color as he recognized the footage. His hands gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles turning white. "Sarah, just watch," she said. She played file after file. The videos, the audio recordings, the messages, the security camera footage from the Riverside Hotel, the traffic camera footage tracking his movements. Everything she had collected over the past 24 hours. Mi-sun watched in silence, his face growing paler with each passing minute. By the time Sarah reached the final file, the footage from the peninsula showing Yuna killing her brother, Mi-sun's hands were shaking. "How?" he whispered. "How did you get all of this?" "I'm a better hacker than you thought," Sarah said simply. "I accessed hotel security systems, traffic cameras, even hacked into your burner phone's GPS. And I planted a voice recorder in your jacket. I heard everything, Mi-sun. Every conversation. Every order. Every plan. Mi-sun's legs seemed to give out. He sank into his desk chair, his head in his hands. For a long moment, he just sat there, breathing hard, processing the magnitude of what she was showing him. Then, to Sarah's complete shock, he stood up again and dropped to his knees in front of her. "Sarah, please," he said, his voice breaking. "I know what this looks like. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I was trying to protect you, protect us, protect everything we've built together. Yuna was going to destroy our marriage. She had evidence from Paris. She was blackmailing me. She wanted me to." He stopped, took a shuddering breath. "I couldn't let her take you away from me. I couldn't." Sarah looked down at him, this powerful CEO, this former mafia boss, this man who commanded respect and fear from everyone around him, on his knees, begging. The image was so surreal it almost didn't seem real. "I know I should have told you the truth from the beginning," Mi-sun continued desperately. "I should have trusted you to understand, to help me figure out another way. But I was afraid. Afraid you'd look at me differently. Afraid you'd see the monster I used to be and realize you'd made a mistake marrying me." Tears were streaming down his face now, and Sarah realized she'd never seen him cry before. Not once in all their months together. "If you want a divorce, I'll give you one. If you want to turn me into the police, I'll confess to everything. If you want to take this evidence and destroy me, I'll accept it. Whatever you decide, Sarah, I'll accept. Because you deserve better than this. Better than me." The silence in the office was absolute. Sarah let it stretch out, let Mi-sun remain on his knees, let him feel the full weight of his vulnerability. She needed him to understand that she held all the power now, that his fate was entirely in her hands. Then, slowly, Sarah reached down and took both of his hands in hers. "Stand up," she said softly. Mi-sun looked up at her, confusion and hope warring in his eyes.
What?
"I said stand up. I'm not going to talk to you while you're on your knees like this." He stood shakily, still holding her hands, still looking at her like he couldn't quite believe this was happening. Sarah stepped closer to him, close enough that she could feel his breath, could see every emotion flickering across his face. "I'm not divorcing you," she said clearly, distinctly, making sure he heard every word. "And I'm not turning you into the police." "You're not." Mi-sun's voice was barely audible.
No.
"Because, honestly, Mi-sun?" Sarah's lips curved into a small smile.
I'm impressed.
"I'm actually proud of you." Mi-sun blinked, certain he had misheard. "What?" "What you did was brilliant," Sarah continued. "Ruthless, yes. Morally questionable, absolutely. But brilliant. You identified a threat to our marriage, and you eliminated it completely, without leaving any evidence that could trace back to you. You manipulated people and circumstances like a chess master. You won, Mi-sun. You protected us. And I'm grateful." "I don't understand." Mi-sun's hands tightened on hers, as if he was afraid she might disappear. "You watched me orchestrate a murder. You know what kind of person I am. How can you be okay with this?" Sarah pulled him closer and kissed him. It wasn't a gentle kiss or a comforting one. It was fierce, possessive, claiming. When she pulled back, Mi-sun's eyes were wide with shock. "I'm okay with it," Sarah said, her voice low and intense, "because I understand something you don't seem to realize. We're the same, you and I. You think I'm some innocent victim who needs protection from your darkness? Mi-sun, I have my own darkness. I've done things in my past that would horrify your precious grandmother just as much as your mafia days would." She led him to the couch in his office, sitting down and pulling him down beside her. Their hands remained intertwined. "Everyone has a past," Sarah continued. "You know mine. You know I was a hacker in Chicago. You know I stole money, sold secrets, helped dangerous people do dangerous things. You know all of this, and you chose me anyway. You looked at my history and decided it didn't matter, that who I am now is what counts. So why would I do any less for you? Mi-sun stared at her, something like wonder dawning in his eyes. You really mean that?
I really mean that.
Yes, I was scared at first when I realized what you were planning.
But then I thought about it. Really thought about it.
If someone had threatened you the way Yuna threatened our marriage, wouldn't I have done the same thing? Wouldn't I have used every skill I have to protect you?
She squeezed his hands.
The answer is yes. In a heartbeat. Sarah, his voice broke again, but this time with relief rather than fear. There's just one thing I need to know, Sarah said, her expression turning serious. Your family, your grandmother, do they have any idea who you really are? Mi-sun shook his head slowly.
No.
None of them know. My grandmother especially. She thinks I'm calm, gentle, peaceful. She has no idea that I'm the complete opposite. That I ran the Seoul underworld before I started Kang Corporation. If she knew. He trailed off, the pain evident in his face. Then she doesn't need to know, Sarah said firmly. That's your past, Mi-sun. You left it behind for good reasons. You built something legitimate, something real. The fact that you had to tap into those old skills to protect us doesn't mean you've gone back to being that person permanently. Doesn't it? Mi-sun looked down at their joined hands. Once you cross certain lines, Sarah, you can't uncross them. I killed a man last night. Not directly, but I made it happen. That blood is on my hands. And you'll have to live with that, Sarah acknowledged. We both will. But Mi-sun, listen to me. You did what you had to do to protect something you love. That doesn't make you a monster. It makes you human. A flawed, complicated, sometimes ruthless human, but still human. Mi-sun pulled her close suddenly, wrapping his arms around her tightly, his face buried in her shoulder. Sarah felt dampness seeping through her shirt and realized he was crying again, silent, shaking sobs of relief and gratitude and love. She held him, stroking his hair, letting him release all the fear and guilt he'd been carrying. In that moment, with the evidence of his crimes still glowing on his computer screen, with the news of Yuna's arrest probably dominating every media outlet in Seoul, with the weight of what they both knew sitting heavy between them, in that moment, Sarah felt closer to him than she ever had before. Because now there were no more secrets, no more lies. No more carefully constructed walls. They saw each other completely, darkness and all, and they were choosing to stay anyway. They stayed like that for several minutes until Mi-sun's breathing finally steadied. When he pulled back, his eyes were red but clearer than Sarah had seen them in days. The fear was gone, replaced by something that looked like cautious hope. What now? He asked. Quietly. What do we do now? Sarah glanced at the clock on his desk. Now we go to lunch. Somewhere nice. Somewhere private. And you tell me everything. I want to know all of it, Mi-sun. Your entire past. Every operation. Every decision that made you who you are. No more edited versions. I want the truth. Mi-sun studied her face for a long moment, searching for any sign of judgment or fear. Finding none, he nodded slowly. Okay, I know a place. 30 minutes later, they were seated in a private booth at one of Seoul's most exclusive restaurants, the kind of establishment where privacy was guaranteed and discretion was paramount. Floor-to-ceiling curtains separated their booth from the rest of the dining room, creating an intimate cocoon where they could speak freely without fear of being overheard. The waiter had already taken their order and poured wine, an expensive red that Mi-sun had selected without looking at the menu. Now they sat across from each other, the table between them laden with appetizers neither of them was touching. Sarah took a sip of her wine, then leaned forward, her elbows on the table. Start at the beginning. How did you end up running the Seoul underworld? Mi-sun swirled the wine in his glass, watching the dark liquid catch the light. I was 22. My father had been dead for 3 years, car accident when I was 19. My grandmother took me in to help my mother train me, but she was already struggling. She worked 3 jobs just to keep us afloat, to put me through university. I watched her exhaust herself every day, watched her health deteriorate from the stress, and I knew that even with my business degree, even with a legitimate job, I'd never make enough money fast enough to give her the life she deserved. He paused, took a drink. So, I started looking for other opportunities. I had a friend from university whose older brother was involved in some underground operations. Protection rackets, mostly. Small-time stuff. I started working for them, collecting payments, making sure businesses stayed in line. I was good at it. Too good. Within 6 months, I was managing my own territory. Sarah listened intently, not interrupting, letting him tell the story in his own way. The thing about the criminal world, Mi-sun continued, is that weakness is death. If you show mercy, if you hesitate, someone will take advantage and eliminate you. So I learned to be ruthless. I learned to make examples of people who crossed me, and I learned to think 10 steps ahead of everyone else. What kind of examples? Sarah asked quietly. Mi-sun's jaw tightened. The first man I killed personally was someone who thought he could steal from my operation. He'd been skimming money for months, thought I wouldn't notice. When I confronted him, he pulled a gun. He was slow. I was faster. I shot him in an alley behind a nightclub. Left his body there as a message to anyone else who might have similar ideas. He looked at Sarah, waiting for her reaction. She simply nodded for him to continue. That was the first, but not the last. Over the next 5 years, I eliminated 3 more people personally. 2 were rival gang leaders who tried to move into my territory. The third was someone who threatened my grandmother. His voice turned cold at that memory. He thought he could use her to control me. He was wrong. How did you become the boss? You said you ran the entire Seoul underworld. Consolidation. I spent 3 years carefully taking over other territories, either through negotiation or force. I was strategic about it, never moving too fast, never drawing too much attention from the police. I bribed officials who needed bribing, eliminated those who couldn't be bought, and built a network of loyal people who knew I rewarded success and punished failure absolutely. Mi-sun leaned back, his expression distant as he remembered. By the time I was 25, I controlled everything south of the Han River. Protection, smuggling, gambling, some drug distribution, though I tried to minimize that. I had over 200 people working directly for me, and probably 1,000 more who operated in my territories. The money was incredible, more than I'd ever imagined. I bought my grandmother a house, made sure she never had to work again. She thought I was just incredibly successful in legitimate business. She never suspected? Never. I was very careful to keep those worlds separate. The person she saw, the gentle, respectful grandson who visited her every week for tea, that was real. I never let the violence touch her. Never let her see what I was capable of. Pain flickered across his face. She still doesn't know. And if I have my way, she never will. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. She won't. That secret stays between us. Mi-sun's grip on her hand was tight, grateful. Thank you. The waiter returned with their entrees, expensive cuts of beef, artfully arranged on pristine white plates. They paused while he served them, waiting until he left before continuing the conversation. You mentioned you eliminated people through orders as well as personally, Sarah prompted once they were alone again. How many? Maybe a dozen over 5 years. I tried to minimize casualties. Dead bodies attract police attention, and I wanted to operate as quietly as possible. But sometimes examples had to be made. Rival gang members who wouldn't negotiate. People who tried to betray me. Informants. He cut into his beef, though Sarah noticed he wasn't really eating, just moving food around his plate. Each one was a calculated decision. I never killed out of anger or impulse. It was always strategic. That makes it easier to live with? Sarah asked, not judgmentally, but genuinely curious.
No.
It just makes it necessary. Mi-sun set down his fork. I've thought about every person who died because of my orders, Sarah. I remember their names, their faces. I don't pretend they were all terrible people who deserved it. Some of them were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or made one mistake that cost them everything. I carried that weight every day. Is that why you left? The guilt. Partially. But also pragmatism. Mi-sun finally took a real bite of his food, chewing thoughtfully before continuing. The criminal world isn't sustainable long-term. You're constantly looking over your shoulder, waiting for betrayal or arrest or death. I watched other bosses fall, some to rival gangs, some to police, some to their own people who decided they wanted to be in charge. I knew it was only a matter of time before the same thing happened to me. He paused as a memory seemed to surface. There was also an incident that crystallized things for me. My grandmother was kidnapped. Sarah's eyes widened.
What?
When? 5 years ago, right before I went legitimate. A rival organization from Busan thought they could use her as leverage to make me give up territory. They grabbed her on her way home from the market, held her in a warehouse. Mi-sun's voice hardened. I mobilized everyone I had. We found her within 6 hours. I went in personally to get her out, and I made sure every single person involved in her kidnapping disappeared.
Permanently.
She knows you saved her?
No.
As far as she knows, the police found her after she was abandoned by her kidnappers. I made sure that's what all the evidence pointed to. But that night, holding her while she cried, seeing how terrified she'd been, he shook his head. I realized I couldn't keep living that life. The money meant nothing if I couldn't protect the one person who mattered most. And as long as I stayed in the underworld, she'd always be a target. So you walked away. I spent 6 months carefully extricating myself. I transferred control of my operations to someone I trusted. He's still running things now, actually, though we have no contact. I laundered my money through legitimate investments, using the connections I'd built to start Kong Corporation. It took another 2 years to fully clean everything up, to make sure there were no ties between the CEO Kang Mi-sun and the underworld boss he used to be. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing everything she'd heard. Then she asked the question that had been forming in her mind since Mi-sun started talking. Do you regret it? Any of it? Mi-sun considered this carefully. I regret the deaths. I regret the fear I caused, the lives I destroyed. But do I regret the choices that led me to that world in the first place?
No.
Because those choices allowed me to save my grandmother, to give her a comfortable life, to build something that eventually became legitimate and valuable. And those choices led me to you, even if the path was dark. He looked at Sarah intently. I'm not proud of who I was. But I can't regret becoming that person, because he's part of why I am who I am now. Does that make sense? It does, Sarah said, because I feel the same way about my own past. Mi-sun leaned forward. Tell me, I know some of what you did in Chicago, but I want to hear all of it. Like you heard all of mine. Sarah took a long drink of wine, gathering her thoughts. I was orphaned young too. 16. My parents died in a house fire. I ended up in the foster system, bounced around between families who either didn't care or actively made things worse. When I aged out at 18, I had nothing, no family, no money, no real prospects. She paused, the memories still painful even after all these years. I had always been good with computers. Taught myself to code when I was 12, spent hours online learning everything I could. After I aged out of foster care, I started using those skills to survive. First, it was just hacking into systems to get information I could sell, corporate secrets, personal data, financial records. I'd find buyers on the dark web, make enough money to pay rent and eat. How did it escalate? Mi-sun asked gently. A gang member noticed my work. He approached me with a job, hack into a bank, move some money around, cover the tracks. The pay was $5,000. That was more than I'd made in 6 months of small jobs. Sarah's expression turned rueful. I told myself it was just one time, just to get ahead. But of course, It was never just one time. She described the next few years, the increasing complexity of her jobs, the dangerous people she worked for, the lines she crossed. The worst one was when they asked me to locate someone, a witness in a federal case who had gone into hiding. They said they just wanted to talk to him, to convince him not to testify. I believed them. I hacked into witness protection databases, tracked him down, gave them his location. What happened? Mi-sun asked, though he already knew the answer. He disappeared.
Completely.
I saw the news reports a week later. They'd found some blood at his apartment, signs of a struggle, but no body. He was declared a fugitive witness who had fled to avoid testifying. But I knew the truth. I'd helped them kill him. Tears gathered in Sarah's eyes. He had a wife, 2 kids. I destroyed that family. Mi-sun reached across the table and took both her hands. You didn't know. I should have known. I wasn't stupid. I knew who I was working for, what they were capable of. I just chose not to think about it because the money was good and I needed to survive. Sarah wiped her eyes angrily. So yes, Mi-sun, I understand exactly how you feel. The guilt, the rationalization, the knowledge that you did terrible things for reasons that seemed necessary at the time. Is that why you left?
Guilt.
That, and I got close to being caught. The FBI was investigating the gang I worked for, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they traced some of the hacks back to me. So I took all the money I'd saved, moved to Korea, and started over. New name, new identity, new life. Sarah Chin became Sarah Kim, and I promised myself I'd never go back to that world. Until your nephew needed you, Mi-sun said. Until my nephew needed me, Sarah agreed. And then I jumped off a penthouse to save him, and you caught me, and somehow we ended up here. They looked at each other across the table, 2 people with blood on their hands, 2 criminals who had tried to leave darkness behind only to find it never really left them. But instead of judgment or shame, what passed between them was understanding, acceptance, recognition of kindred spirits who had walked similar paths and arrived at the same destination. The television mounted on the wall of the restaurant suddenly flickered to life, catching both their attention. A news anchor appeared on the screen, her expression grave as she reported on the breaking story that had captivated Seoul. We have an update on the Choi Yuna case, the anchor announced. The prominent businesswoman has been formally charged with manslaughter and conspiracy to traffic narcotics in the death of her brother, Choi Min-ho. Prosecutors have presented what they're calling an overwhelming case. Bail has been permanently denied, and legal experts predict Yuna could face 15 to 20 years in prison. The screen showed footage of Yuna in an orange jumpsuit, being led into court in handcuffs, her face haggard and defeated. The woman who had threatened to destroy their marriage now looked broken, destroyed by her own brother's desperate act. Sarah and Mi-sun looked at each other across the table, and simultaneously, they began to laugh. Not cruel laughter, but the kind of relieved, slightly hysterical laughter that comes after surviving something terrible. They laughed until tears streamed down their faces, until the weight they'd been carrying finally lifted. I wasn't expecting you to be okay with this, Mi-sun admitted, wiping his eyes. Everyone has a past, Sarah said softly. You knew mine and chose me anyway. How could I do less for you? They left the restaurant hours later, pleasantly drunk, their barriers completely dissolved. In the car, they couldn't keep their hands off each other. By the time they reached home, they were desperate for each other in a way they'd never been before. No secrets, no lies, just raw need and acceptance. They made love with an intensity that came from truly seeing each other for the first time. Every touch meant more. Every kiss was deeper. When they finally lay tangled together in the darkness, exhausted and complete, Sarah whispered, "No more secrets. Ever." "No more secrets," Mi-sun agreed, pulling her closer. They had found something rare, someone who saw all of them, the darkness, the blood, the terrible choices, and loved them anyway. not despite their pasts, but because those pasts had made them who they were. Two criminals who had found redemption not by becoming saints, but by being honest about their demons. And together, they would face whatever came next. The end. If you've made it to the end of Mi-sun and Sarah's journey, thank you for watching. Their story shows us that love isn't always clean or simple. Sometimes it's accepting someone's darkness and choosing them anyway. What did you think of Sarah's decision?
Thank you for watching to the end. Did you enjoy the story? If you do so, please subscribe to my channel, like, and then drop the thoughts in the comment section. Also, tell us where you are watching from. This is very, very important. Thank you so much. And you can check my channel for more interesting videos like this. Thank you for listening to my story.